Oh,
Yeah, that was impressive.
all right, we are live on the YouTube.
All righty, welcome everybody. It is Tuesday, April 15th. This is House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. And we are continuing to discuss S50, an act relating to increasing the size of solar net metering projects that qualify for expedited rural registration. So we got about a little bit of the ways through, I think, walking through the parts of the bill that we had kind of already settled on or decided on. And why don't we pick up there? Is that okay, Ellen?
I'm sorry. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I thought we finished, but I'm happy to walk through it quickly again.
Okay. Why don't we introduce ourselves? I forgot that. I'm Rep. Kathleen James from Bennington 4.
Richard Bailey, Lamont 2. Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southbrook, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Allen, Rutland 4.
Darren Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klupner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great. And in the room.
Ben Edgerly, Walsh Keeper.
Peter Sterling, Rads.
Greg Farrow from PC.
John Brayvan, Department Environment.
Allison Despathi, Danville resident.
All right, Ellen, for the record.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So today I have provided the committee with two documents. First is draft 2.1 of your amendment. And the reason it's 2.1 is because last week I brought you 1.1 and there are no substantive changes between them, but draft 2.1 is a strike all amendment and it showed all of the sections in the bill. So you will recall from draft 1.1, you only were making changes to sections 3, 4, and then a new 5. And so draft 2.1 includes sections 1 and 2, but there are no changes from what the Senate sent you.
Okay.
So section 1 is making the change 15 kilowatts to 25 kilowatts, requiring that there be an expedited registration procedure for systems 25 kilowatts and less in size. Section 2 is the rulemaking provision regarding that, which says that the PUC has to update their net metering rule to address this change from 15 to 25 kilowatts. And that also is the intent of the General Assembly that the Commission allow those systems up of 25 kilowatts or less to use the expedited registration before the rules are updated.
Great.
And so you have not changed that from what the Senate sent you.
Super. Okay. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns with sections 1 or 2? And my intent here, by the way, is to leave behind portions of the bills that we're good with, so that when we go to vote on this bill later next week or whenever that is, we've got sections that we're putting in the drawer because we're done. So
I think I've heard that called closing the door even. There's another one on that section.
So I just want to make sure that we don't go to vote later next week and find out that folks still have questions or concerns or comments. So as Ellen described, section 1 is basically the underlying intent of the entire bill. It's 25K KW will now qualify, and there's going to be, for this expedited registration, and the PUC is going to update its rules to indicate same. Is everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Boom. That was the door.
With the window open.
With the window open. No. Not just point that out. No. Alrighty, good. Alrighty, section 3. Ellen.
Section 3 is the language that your committee worked on last week. The Senate sent you language regarding setbacks using the municipal setbacks. You have changed that section to be amending section 248. That's
What page are we on?
section page 3, section 3. And so this language hasn't changed from what you reviewed last week, but it's adding a 10-foot setback. So for from a state or municipal highway measured at the edge of the traveled way, 10 feet for a facility with a plant capacity less than or equal to 25 kilowatts. And then the same for a boundary, for 10 feet for a facility with a plant capacity less than or equal to 25 kilowatts. That's on page 4. And then it strikes subdivision 2, which says that there's no setback requirement for facilities less than or equal to 15 kilowatts.
Okay, we talked about that at length, and I feel like this is what we all settled on the setbacks. I actually have a question that occurred to me over the weekend. From the edge of the traveled way or from the edge of the property boundary to what? The wingspan of the array, the farthest sticking out point, or the poles where it's sticking into the ground?
I would think it would be the edge.
From
You-
Yeah,
I would
I
think
think
so
it's
too. I'd say.
Anything that's above grade, or matter of fact, below grade for that matter, has to have the setback.
I thought
Just wanted
it
to make
said,
sure.
Defined somewhere.
yeah,
In the-
somewhere it said to the nearest, from the road to the nearest point on the
Yeah,
facility.
somewhere.
It said that.
Do you think it's in the underlying?
Probably
statute?
what they use. It's in the statute. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
240.
It's not shown on this page, but yes, it's actually subdivision 4 under S. And
248S4.
yep. And it's defined. I took it out for having it clutter the page, but I can put it back in there if it'd be helpful to read. So
It might be.
it defines both kilowatt and plant capacity, and then setback, which means the shortest distance between the nearest portion of a solar panel or support structure for a solar panel at its point of attachment to the ground and the property boundary or edge of the highway's traveled way.
One more time.
I'm gonna put it on the
You're gonna put
page.
it in there.
Yeah,
So it's from the
from the
farthest sticking out point.
nearest portion of the solar panel or support structure at its point of attachment to the ground.
Oh, wait, so it is the ground.
Different.
Well, that at a point, if you have a
That's the
pool coming up on a pole and then you have the wing spread it out
Yep.
both sides, I think we're talking about the edge of the wing, not the edge of the sonotube. And only the sonotube's attached to the ground.
Well, it says or after panel.
I defer if someone else wants
Yeah,
to
might
answer.
have to read that again to me. Or.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know if Greg has any additional clarification, but I can also, if we could potentially put it up on the screen if you all want to look at it.
Can you just read that again?
Yeah, let's put it up on the screen.
The attachment to the ground that may have skewed my opinion.
Yeah.
Good.
Mhm. Greg Downey?
I mean, it says the panel, the edge of the panel, so it's the closest part to the setbacks, closest part of the facility.
Okay.
We're not gonna look at if there's a pole in the middle, no, we're not measuring from the pole, we're doing from the edge.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure there was,
That's what we do.
when Ellen read it, I got,
Yeah, you don't need to change that. Okay.
okay, so it's from the farthest,
Yeah,
okay. For the closest part.
Can you pass me the book, Ellen?
You have it on your laptop, don't you?
What I have pulled up is different from having it
Well,
open to the.
I don't
public.
have my laptop with me, so
Oh,
I'll need the
that's
book
good.
back.
I'm gonna give it,
Ah,
I'm gonna give it right back, I promise. I'm not gonna lose the page. If I can.
okay, well, that was my question.
Okay, so yes. The nearest portion of a solar panel or support structure for a solar panel.
Okay,
And I think that comma in the second part, at its point of attachment to the ground, refers to the support structure, not to the solar panel, which is on the other side of the or. The
All right.
nearest portion of a solar panel. Yes, okay.
nearest portion, okay. That's my question, nearest portion of solar. All right, does anybody have any questions or comments or additional thoughts on the minimum setback part? Okay,
Section 4. So this is the part about customers transferring, changing their decision about keeping their recs. And so your committee added this language. It's different than what the Senate sent you, but it has not changed from what you saw last week. So on page 5, the rule shall allow a customer to change the customer's decision to retain or transfer the attributes once in the 90-day period after the net metering system is commissioned.
okay. Once in the 90-day period after the net metering system is commissioned, I have a public comment. In my inbox. All right, folks, hang on one sec. We do have a public comment on this from a Vermonter who did fall into this category. Their electrician made a mistake. I am sending that right now to everybody, and I'm sorry it came while I was driving this morning. Oh, no, it came yesterday. Sorry about that. All right, so house energy. Sorry about that. When you're babysitting with 5 and a 3-year-old, things fall through the cracks. All right, here it comes. And Jack, can you please post this as public comment?
Yep.
From Paul Unger. And just post, I'm gonna delete. Folks, as I forward this, you're gonna see me. This is Paul writing to say, I would like to make a public comment. And me saying, great, would you like to write a letter? Here's what, be sure to send it to all of us. So I'm not going to post all of that as public comment, just his letter that he then wrote, okay? Right. And I'm going to take off his important message regarding this electronic thing because he's a professor. Okay, folks, this is coming to everybody right now. Okay, so check your inboxes. In general, I can kind of boil this down because he did reach out to me first to say he would like to make a public comment. So Mr. Unger supports the bill, but he has thoughts on the 90-day period. He had an experience that you guys can read about, and that we'll post on our website momentarily. He used a local Vermont electrician as the installer, and the electrician told him that he would take care of the paperwork. And as we've all imagined, probably often happens, they didn't have in-depth conversations about the paperwork and recs and how all that works and what recs are. And the installer, in good faith, made a mistake and checked the wrong box. And then he gets into something that does feel to me like a one-off, and we can discuss this when we get his letter, but there were a lot of delays. So the system was not hooked up. So the paperwork sounds like the CPG was issued, the permit was issued, and then there were a lot of delays before the system came online. So it took him beyond that 90-day period. And I'm not going to speak for him. I'll let you guys read. Is it in your inbox yet?
Madam Chair,
Yeah, did it not come?
the language says after it's commissioned, right? So it's 90 days when it goes live.
Live. Okay, so that would not be relevant.
If I understand it correctly, we should just clarify that.
Let's
But
clarify
That's how I understand
right
the
now.
language.
And you guys can read his letter and see if you think his situation would fall outside of this anyway. It sounded to me like the permit was issued and then it didn't go live. Yeah.
Yeah, commission means interconnected to the grid. So he had delayed, as I understand it, he has delays and interconnected to the grid. the 90-day clock wouldn't start until he did get it connected and started seeing bills.
Okay, should be in everybody's inbox now. And why don't we, since we have time, why don't we all take a minute to read this over so that I'm not trying to translate for him. You've all got his letter yourself now. Greg, would you like to see the letter? Or do you want to just?
I understand. I get it. I don't think I need to see it. But if it's commissioning, that means interconnection. And if he had delays in commissioning, it wouldn't matter to the 90 days. It wouldn't start until it did get interconnected and presumably would see a bill within 30 days. He'd be able to check, and then you'd have another 2 months to check again. So.
Okay, it says, says the permit came through in March 2023. Construction delays and issues with the hookup. It did not go live until July 2024. So yeah, thanks for that reminder, Rev Martin. And then they got the first month or two of bills. It looked like they were being charged. Now, I think his one of his complaints or the points he raises was that he did bring it to the PUC and his request was denied as the assignment of the Rex is irrevocable. So that goes a little bit against the informal testimony we heard that usually the PUC will just work with folks to make this right if there's been a mistake. Mr. Unger his point of view is also that there should not be any time limit. I'm not sure if the committee agrees with that. I feel like we already talked about that, but we could talk about it more. And he also is requesting a look back provision, and I feel like we talked about that as well. I'm not sure where. I personally don't support the look back provision. And I think that we talked about 90 versus 120. If it makes folks feel more comfortable going to 120, I don't have a problem with that. I think the look back would be a big can of worms and would be opening possibly a huge Pandora's box for circumstances like this one that may be unfortunate but sound more like a one-off. Maybe not a one-off, but so should I just give folks a minute to read the letter, or does everybody know? Yeah, Rep. Sebelius.
No, I read it.
Okay. And sorry I didn't get this to everybody yesterday. That's on me.
I'm fine with 120. I was like, the only, if I remember correctly, the impediment on the time frame is that the utilities don't want just this nebulous situation hanging out there for.
Correct.
Right. There's no other consideration besides that.
And I also suspect that after a few years, the utilities will have enough data to say the initial decision holds 98% of the time. So we can count on 98% of it, and, or whatever the statistical number is. But it's hard to imagine that 90 or 120 days would make any particular difference to them.
Okay. Yeah, Victoria.
I have a question, maybe it's for Peter Sterling, about the kind of information a consumer has online. Like, where is like a, so you want to go solar kind of website where this kind of information, like, hey, there's a new law, cover this mistake, or, so how does this stuff get communicated? So it's not just from the developer to the consumer.
Peter Sterling, New Braunfels. The Department of Public Service does have information about the net metering program on its website.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say how current and how helpful it is to your average consumer. I will say the way it generally runs is someone talks to a developer about what their options are, and most developers are trying to get someone the lowest cost product, which means, educating them about what the options are as far as keeping your recs or letting them go to the utility.
Okay, yeah, Rick Holland.
He apparently got a CPG back in 23.
Mhm.
And so he'd be under the rules of the provisions prior to August 1st, 2024 was then net metering 2.5 came into place. Was the recs, I didn't review net metering 2.0, so were the recs in place back then? So minus 4 cents for recs?
Yes, there's always been recs.
Oh. And they've always been, if you retain them, you forfeit 4 cents.
Well, the prices go up and down.
Did that answer?
No, good.
Okay,
But either,
That was added, I don't know, 2018. Because the utilities were complaining
was that,
that they needed those to meet their tier 2, I guess.
oh, they needed the rec.
They needed the recs,
Yeah,
so
tier
they said,
2.
and we're paying basically a penalty by paying this higher net metering rate, so that was the quid pro quo. You know, it's legislated.
Got it.
okay. All right, has everybody had a chance to read Mr. Unger's letter and reflect on it? I feel badly that I didn't send that yesterday. I don't want to rush consideration of that. The commissioning thing was important for me, so thanks for that reminder. I would be happy going with 120. I think the look back is, I don't think we want to go there.
I'm in the same place as you, Madam Chair.
Okay, everybody else?
120 for me.
Yeah, I'd sooner have 90, but I could go along with 120.
I'm good with 120.
Okay, no. All right, that is great. And Jack, you'll post Mr. Unger's letter on our website as public comment, right?
It is up right now.
Awesome. Okay, great. And I will write back to him and remind him about the commissioning thing and tell him where we think we've landed. And I'm happy to copy the committee on that. Okay, section 5. Oh, yeah, Victoria,
I
sorry.
just want to share that I went to the PUC website. They do have guidance, an FAQ that will need to be updated as a result of if we pass this law.
Okay,
It does address recs. So it's good to know
great.
that the information is public. The PUC has an FAQ.
PUC has an FAQ that they'll update PDQ. All right. Land of acronyms. Okay, section 5. Oh, right. Okay.
Yep, section 5 also has not changed from last week. This is new. It was not in the Senate's bill. Section 5 is amending 248A7. It's striking reference from 15, changing it to 25 kilowatts. And then it is also, and this is regarding filing of the certificate of public good in the land records. And so it also strikes the requirement that the proof of recording in the land records be submitted to the commission. So they will still need to file it in the land record, but they do not need to submit follow-up information with the PUC.
Okay. And I remember we talked about this last week. This original requirement dates back to the
2016.
right to 2016. Okay. And these documents would now be searchable not only in the town land records, but at EPUC. So it's there to be found. Okay. Anybody have any additional thoughts on this? Okay, so I'm going to put this part of the bill. Ellen will update 90 to 120, but I'm going to put this part of the bill in some sort of metaphorical bulletin board and put a little sticky note on it that says done, because it sounds to me like we've looking around the table and from our conversations, it sounds to me like we've probably had unanimous committee support on all this part of the bill. Is that where everybody's at?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay. Okay. Alrighty, so I think we're down to single plant, which is the last remaining chunk, that we're considering putting onto this bill. I did talk to, Senator Watson yesterday, and I asked her, when she thought we would need to get this bill over to her committee in order for them to look at it, consider our changes, and either concur or send it back to us. And she said she didn't know. So I'm going to continue to work on that with her. I'll continue to dial that question in with her. But my feeling is that just doing calendar math and looking at the end of the session and the fact that, Senate committees stop meeting and all that kind of stuff, that we should probably vote this out next week. So I don't think we need to decide on single plant today. I don't think I'm ready to decide on single plant today, but I think we've got time now to go over the language that we've got at least in front of us and make sure we understand it, see what questions we have, and then maybe just give it a couple days for people to think about it and raise any more questions. So Ben and Peter have been working hard to try to get some language together that they hope and believe addresses the comments that we've heard in committee from the department and from the PUC. And so we've got a draft of that language. I did send it off to the department and to the PUC, and we will send that. I don't know whether we'll have them in to testify again or whether they'll want to submit written comment or whatever it is, we'll be hearing from them again. But for now, why don't we see what language we have in front of us that Ellen wrote so that we can have something concrete to look at.
So posted on your website today also is a standalone amendment with the single plant language in it. It's draft 3.1 with Friday's date. And so this is based on what the committee was discussing last week with Ben and Peter. So I drafted it to reorganize it a bit. And so page 1 of the amendment. So this is amending the definition of plant in 8002, which is in the renewable energy chapter. Okay. So plant means an independent technical facility.
I'm sorry, can you
Yeah.
hold on a second?
Yeah.
We are struggling to find the bill.
Yeah.
The language.
Get copies of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Jack, can you print it out for folks?
What am I printing?
The
Single plant language.
single plant amendment from Ellen that I sent it to the committee, right?
It's posted on our website.
And it's posted on our website.
Draft number 3.1-S.50.
What folder are you in?
Yeah, that's
Go to
always
today's date.
Since days.
I haven't.
Jack, I have a hard copy.
Yeah.
I would print some very copies of this.
It's S50 single plant language.
And it was emailed to the committee on Friday night.
Yeah.
All right, everybody have it?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go.
All right, so plant means independent technical facility that generates electricity from renewable energy. And then there is new language added. Common usage of utility-owned electric distribution and transmission lines shall not indicate facilities are part of the same plant.
Okay.
Once constructed, a plant shall not be modified to divide it into multiple plants. A plant that is not enrolled or proposed for enrollment in the net metering program under section 8010 of this title, or standard offer program under section 8005A of this title, shall not affect the eligibility for the net metering program or standard offer program for any existing plant that is already enrolled in the programs.
Okay, why don't we stop there? Comments, questions on this proposed language?
So some of this language is part of what Peter and Ben talked about with you last week and showed you, and then a few of the sentences have been added to address concerns that came up in the committee's discussion. Particularly that part about dividing it into multiple plants. I believe you discussed that.
Yeah. Okay. Do folks have comments on this part or questions for Ellen about this part? Rep. Howland?
So if a facility puts in a line, like was sent to us over the weekend, the pictures, puts in a line extension and the utility takes over ownership and maintenance of that line, then that line becomes a public utility that they can then attach to the end of it, the end of that line. So you got the end of the line, you got the T that comes down to the existing or the first customer. People can then connect on to the end because they're not, if they're connecting as described here as facilities, transmission and distribution lines owned by the electric utility. Utility owned electric distribution and transmission lines. So somebody builds the line and they turn that line over to the electric utility. The electric utility then owns and maintains the line. No money changes hands, but the facility is then held off the end. And I mean, that becomes this shall not indicate the facility are part of the same plan. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? You got
Rep. Kleppner?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I keep.
No, no.
Yeah, so the question is that something we're concerned about? That someone wants to build a solar facility, they build a distribution line, a connection line, and then they hand it over to the utility. So now someone else can add to the end of that without triggering the single plant consideration.
Well, that's what they're saying, not here, but that may be a concern to the electricity. One, if a single point interrupts, a single break in the line interrupts all the electricity, and then they may have concerns of the total quantity that's passing through an existing point. But the power companies obviously going to adjust their control for the total energy that's coming out of the combined plant. But when we talk about the facility was built at the front of the gravel pit under standard offer, and then now we want whether or not number 2 plant further up the road was using the same facilities, and under the existing rule, they can't attach to the same facilities. And we were trying to remove that from the definition. And I think maybe we need to hear more from the electric utilities.
So just to tell you where I'm coming from on this, we're not going to decide on this today, but the reason why we're having this conversation at all is because in my opinion, it's helpful and useful and a good outcome to build more solar on land where solar already exists. And I feel like the language has moved a long way. And I'm not sure that we can get to an endpoint where we are able to put in a phrase that addresses every single possible hypothetical thing that could happen. I think we need to think about, do we think it would be a good and useful thing to allow more solar with a lot of restrictions around it at this point to be placed on places where solar already exists? So I've seen anyway, a lot of pictures of places where solar already is. And I keep coming back to my underlying value of like, okay, that's a good place to put more solar. You know, we're not chopping down more trees. We're not building more roads. We're not putting up more utility poles. We're not putting up more wires. And I think we could spend a long time trying to think through every possible way that everybody could ever benefit or gain the system. And it could be impossible. It could be impossible to do that. I think a lot of times you need to go forward with a good goal, make sure you've tried to see around every corner. But I guess I just wanted to bring us back to why we're even talking about this, because I hope we can find our way through this, because I think it is the sites we're looking at anywhere, and the sites where these arrays are going in are, in my opinion, good places to put more solar, as long as we can figure out a thoughtful way to do it. Rep. Sibilia and Southward?
Yeah, I agree with you that that is also my inclination. If there is a way to do this, it makes sense to me that we site more solar on places where it already is. I am, you know, a little worried about not knowing what we don't know. And so I'm really glad that, you've asked the PUC and the department to come in and testify on this, and that will go a long way with me in terms of being willing to move forward with this. But I agree with you. I think it's important to see if we can do it for the reasons that you've stated. Sure.
Yeah, I just think it's a worthy goal to keep trying to figure this out, and to understand there may be a point at which, you know, I hope that the PUC and the department are willing to meet us in the middle here, so that we don't keep, you know, moving forward, and the goalposts keep changing. Rep. Southworth?
So is it good practice for us to be looking at this if there's pending or current litigation surrounding this? And if so, wouldn't we be better off waiting to see the outcome so we get whatever the outcome is, to form better legislation based on that?
Yes, I was also concerned about this. And it's my understanding, and we'll see if we can get folks to push back or to, you know, reflect on this on the record, but it's my understanding that the latest language we've added would take this out of the realm of current litigation. Ellen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not on that point specifically. So when you amend a statute, it is applying prospectively, unless you actively add language requiring it to be retroactive. So you can't make this effective in past years unless you specifically add language to do that. Additionally, a lawsuit is about the law at the time the lawsuit is filed, and so changes to the statute will not affect what is happening with the litigation. Caveat to that being, sometimes courts do make statements saying they are watching what the legislature is doing. But that is pretty rare. But generally speaking, legislation is forward-looking and does not have an impact on cases that are currently before the court. Legislative amendment related to litigation come up for different reasons. Sometimes the legislature decides to work on something because it has been litigated. Sometimes they do that in response to a decision by the court the legislature wants to go in a different direction of. So there are different reasons to make an amendment because there has been litigation. So you may want to think about that. Decisions by the court can be a source of potential language to include in the legislation if there's been a decision that, or to particularly avoid if the legislature doesn't like a decision from the court. So it's not sort of unanimous or, uniform as what to whether or not the legislature should act or should not act during a time of litigation. Unless the legislature is specifically looking at the instance particularly before the court at that moment. So it's a little bit more complicated than saying you should never act when there's litigation happening. But you may just want to be aware that you maybe can't impact what the court is going to decide to do in that particular case regardless.
I think that's a really important point to raise. So your original question, should we be careful? I think for me anyway, the answer is yes.
Wouldn't it be better to have a decision that we can understand from the courts to further better legislation than doing something just arbitrarily? Because their language may direct us in a way that we weren't even looking at and allow more than what we're looking at or less. I mean, it's the courts that are making that decision, and I value their decisions over what we're just talking about in committee.
So I heard two different things that Ellen said. One is that the whatever litigation is going on, and I'm sort of feeling hampered by the fact that the PUC says they can't talk about pending litigation, which I totally understand. Understood. You can't talk about it. So we know very little about it. At least I don't know very much about it. But yet we're possibly letting it drive our decision making here or play into our decision making here, but we don't know very much about it. So I'm sort of like, it's helpful to me to hear Ellen say that litigation or that legislation is prospective. So whatever lawsuit is happening over standard offer it's about how standard offer was written or is written in the law as it was written at the time the lawsuit was filed. So in some ways we're leaving it in the past. But what I'm more interested in exploring is whether, with all the changes that we've made to this legislation, whether this even impacts the ongoing lawsuit. And I'm not sure that it does anymore. Because we're saying this doesn't apply to standard offer, and this is a standard offer lawsuit. I do know that much.
I had thoughts on two different subjects that we touched on. So I'll start with the one that we're on and then go back to a previous one. And I think we have kind of two choices here. One is wait for the lawsuit to play itself out and see what whether that decision affects what we want to do, or requires that we change what we want to do. The other is to move forward, and if the court's decision requires changes to standard offer language, it will presumably require it all the way through. So you guys will have to make whatever adjustments the court orders. And neither one feels particularly risky to me, except I guess there's the time risk, right? We have no idea how long this thing's going to take, right? It could play out for years and we haven't. So, but to me, sort of acting, going forward, moving forward with this, and if there is a required change based on the lawsuit, it will affect more than just this piece. It will affect everywhere standard offer is. Doesn't feel like a huge risk to me. The other
Go ahead.
point.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot you had 2
Since
points.
I reserve spots for two.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if someone can help with the example that Representative Howland raised, in terms of what, in the process, my understanding is there are protections against too much capacity getting attached to the line that a utility just won't, like, they won't allow their transformers to explode by connecting too much to them. And not to be facetious about it, but I see some heads nodding from people who know more than I do. So if you would like to invite their answer to that question, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Who wants to, does somebody want to answer the question and then who,
Oh,
yes.
I don't think they'd ever reach a wire capacity. So it has to probably do with the controls in where it's located on the distribution or transmission system. So that's something the utility could really have to weigh in on. And I think they have that opportunity when they make that application.
They do.
So,
Yeah, that's covered.
so. that's one.
And aren't they likely to be the off taker because we're talking about
Yeah.
PPAs? So I'm just confused too why the lawsuit about the standard offer program is a constraint when we're excluding the standard offer program from this definition or from.
I don't think it is. I'll try to get some testimony or a public comment or something. Because what I'm hearing, but this is all just now chatter, and we need to get it in the committee here on the record, is that the way this is worded, the lawsuit is irrelevant to what we're doing. But I can't speak to that, and but we can get folks to, because I know it's a concern to people. Yeah.
I'm just concerned that if we make legislation in this and send it to the floor and it passes,
Mhm.
that whatever the outcome of the litigation is may affect what we pass, and therefore it's making it null and void or giving us an opportunity to do something different. Waiting for that decision to me is a better practice than just creating something and putting it out and putting it on the books.
Rep. Marm?
I think there's been a whole series of litigation on this definition. So, I mean, there's cases I think we need to clarify this that have been settled already that we can look at if we want to go that way. So it's not just one case. This has been litigated multiple times.
Right, so as stated, we don't know what the litigation's about,
The current litigation.
current litigation is about.
I think what we have is a serial litigator.
So I want to be very cautious and I want to make sure that
Mhm.
we're doing good work and not just putting something out there and waiting for an opportunity to probably do better legislation that is going to hopefully make it better for the Vermonters that are going to benefit instead of not doing that and just increasing funds for other people. I just want to be very careful of that.
Okay. And I would say I'm feeling caution from the other side. If we can find a good policy here that we can, get some agreement on, I don't want to not do it because one, as I've said, that the lawsuit that's ongoing may no longer be connected to this language at all. And two, especially if it's ongoing rolling litigation from a particular solar developer, we could wait for years and never do anything because this lawsuit could be settled in next month, or it could be settled in 2 years, and then they could sue again. So I totally hear you. I don't want this to be the reason that we stop working on this until we understand more and make sure they're directly connected. And we can find out.
I don't understand how the large net metering get connected in here, but I thought part of the reasoning for the previous limitation under standard offer was that economically net metering has the highest remuneration to the builder than standard offer, and that current market PPAs are less than that. So the idea of limiting the 2.2 megawatts in the standard offer was such to, I guess, spread the wealth or more diversify the generation across the range. Standard offer is all pooled by the whole state, the way I read it, and each utility takes proportion to it, proportional to their load.
And it's, and standard offer, yeah, I was just about to say, so standard offer is done. And we're left with projects in the pipeline.
Projects in the pipeline, and if projects in the pipeline don't get built because they're not economical, are there, can new projects be proposed to that standard offer so that
Until they reach the capacity.
if we eliminate this definition, somebody can build adjacent to the standard offer plan. And
We're not eliminating the definition, right? We're trying to update.
we're eliminating the utility line from being a point belonging to the project. It belongs to the utility once they turn it over to the utility.
Ellen?
I haven't even finished reading the rest of the language, and I just want to make sure that you know that there is more language.
Yeah, okay.
And so,
All right, so where are
maybe
we?
that will answer part of the questions that were just asked, because it's not ruling out these programs. It's the rest of the proposed amendment is segmenting the definitions.
Right. Okay, onward we go. Thank you, Ellen.
And another question that was asked, this is not changing the interconnection rule, which is a separate PUC rule that I don't know the details of, but the rules for how the individual projects interconnect to the lines is governed by a different rule, and this is not changing that. So the process for the utilities to approve that interconnection is also not changing. Okay. So I read paragraph 18, which is intended to cover all of the projects that would fall under the definition of plant. But then there is a distinction. There's a subdivision A and a subdivision B. So subdivision A is for purposes of the net metering program and the standard offer program. A group of facilities enrolled or proposed for enrollment in net metering or standard offer, and this keeps the rest of the definition, shall be considered one plant if the group is part of the same project and uses common equipment and infrastructure such as roads, control facilities, and connections to the electric grid, common ownership, contiguity with the in time of construction, and proximity of facilities to each other shall be relevant to determining whether a group of facilities is part of the same project. And then subdivision B says for purposes of yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I promise this is the last time I will ask this question. Should we not include language about future programs that propose to pay above market rates?
I'm so glad you're asking this question because I haven't gotten an answer. No.
Thank you.
Because why?
Because it's speculative, and our office never advises drafting contingent language that is so speculative that you can't even predict what the name of the program would be. So at the time a new program would be considered in legislation, it'd have to be in legislation, right? You would look to the definition as we were, should you adopt this amendment, working in committee, you would look at the definition, and then the committee would then have the choice to say, which of the definition segments here would we want to apply to this program in particular? Having it be speculative could only lead to litigation, I feel, because there would be a question of down the line, if it came up, does that program meet whatever is intended here? And you need to be very specific. And I think it just would be very difficult and lead to litigation.
I promise not to ask it again, and you just guaranteed that I won't ask the question.
And so technically you could, but as your lawyer, I would advise you against doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that question to the committee is no to speculative. To the left.
Okay, so subdivision B at the bottom of page 1. So for purposes other than net metering and standard offer, independent technical facilities of not more than 10 megawatts cumulative capacity that are located on the same parcel or an adjacent parcel shall not be considered a single plant if this facility uses separate generators, inverters, and production meters. So the language is not much different than what you were reviewing last week. It's just been reorganized to have parts that apply to any plant and then parts that apply to net metering and standard offer and parts that apply to the other programs.
Okay, so it's saying if you do share generators, inverters, production meters, the actual power producing pieces, then you're, let's see, you cannot share. Okay, so, all right. Sorry, I got myself caught in a double negative. So you can't be considered a single plant if you use these separate things.
Yes. They should
Mike,
not be
sorry,
considered.
Ref Godford.
So in my mind, the purpose of this is to protect ratepayers around the state. This doesn't do with, this increases with net metering and standard offer. If we truly are trying to do that, I think we ought to be looking at market rate. We ought to be looking at community solar in order to truly affect rate reduction or stabilization for Vermonters. I don't believe this does that.
Rep Klepman?
My sense of what this does is standard offers gone, and it does, or it's,
Dwindling away.
yeah, there's a, that's not being expanded to be used out. And this doesn't make any changes to net metering to make it, it just makes it easier for market rate facilities to get. And that,
If I don't read this correctly.
no,
Other than,
yeah, B, for purposes other than net metering or standard offer, then it makes it easier, but for net metering, it leaves it where it is, so I think this will lead to more.
So even the increase of another solar array from the existing one, if it goes into net metering, that's not going to be the. Right.
And I think the big part of this will allow more market rate to get built, which should lower rates on average, since there's some above market and market. So the more market you have, the lower the average cost is. The question of expanding existing net metering programs, I would
So it's
be delighted to defer to someone.
section A, except for purpose of net metering program standard operate group of facilities enrolled, which could be in the pipelines
Yeah,
or proposed for enrollment shall be considered one plant. So that tells me that
If it needs, if it's using those other things.
and
And that's the
those,
current definition.
those are
how
the
it
more
is now.
stringent requirements, right? Like they can't use the same road. You're leaving that in place.
so is there a way that this is going to be able to be utilized to increase net metering?
So let's see.
What do you mean increase net metering? On the same site or for different people?
I think I understand the question. I think I understand the question, and I think it's a question that I have as well, which is, are we proposing language that would allow you to expand an existing net metering site here
So
with to also be net meters, to expand this a net meter site?
So there's an existing cap on net metering, so 500 kilowatts. A single plant cannot have more than 500 kilowatts to be considered net metering. That is not changing. And if a plant already has a CPG and is rolled in net metering, they'd have to be amending their CPG if they're trying to add kilowatts within that existing plant structure. And so it's not changing that, but it's talking about building a separate array. It would have to be above 500 kilowatts because otherwise they would be allowed to, I think, add up. Like if they only had 100 kilowatts.
They could add 500 limit. They could go 500, they could add another 400, not exceed the 500.
So, but then that would come into the analysis of if they're using the common infrastructure and equipment.
And the barriers right now, if someone has a 100 kilowatts in net meter and wants to go to 200 kilowatts,
The only, I think barrier potentially is that at 150 kilowatts, I think the application changes. So like there's the expedited registration, then there's like the mid-tier registration, and there's the larger registration, but if they have an existing CPG, they'd have to go through the amendment process through their CPG.
and this does not affect that either way. It doesn't make it easier, it doesn't make it harder, it just leaves that program where it is. Is that
Right.
accurate?
Yes.
Mark?
Are we hearing from the PUC on this language?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I said earlier. Sorry, I sent this
Help
to,
us to.
yeah, I sent this to both the PUC and the department and Greg, I mean, we'll get them in for actual testimony, but Greg?
I'm happy to be in on this part if you.
Yeah,
that
sure,
would be
great.
helpful.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, so Ellen's right. This doesn't change anything for existing net metering or tender offer. Doesn't make it easier, harder, keeps it the same, but segregates out standard offer and net metering from much larger tier 2 res projects. That's all you're doing. So you could build a tier 2 res project on the same parcel that already houses a net metering project to Representative James' concern about building more stuff on the same parcel. However, it wouldn't count as a net metering project or have anything to do with that. So to address your concern. So I think that's what you're getting. So
My concern is just opening the door to allow more increases for ratepayers.
this wouldn't impact any rates for standard offer or net metering. Now, I can talk about that other part, the 10 megawatt cap, that might impact ratepayers, but we haven't gotten there yet. So
As I understand it, this would lower costs for developers, sometimes by hundreds of thousands of dollars, which would then be passed on to ratepayers. So as I'm hoping this, like Thomas's testimony last week, because if you're doing a PPA, the project costs are lower by a significant amount of money, then that will eventually trickle down to lowering.
I mean, if you believe it, trickle down. Some of us down.
Well,
Well, I mean, that's part of my
but you're arguing
motivation
trickle
here
up.
is to, I mean, we're lowering barriers to get it built, and we're lowering costs so that it will eventually be passed on.
I mean, the developer's under no obligation to pass on those savings to ratepayers. Is that
But
right?
they are obliged to put in the lowest bid
Right.
if they want the project.
Yeah, 100%.
So if they're saving money, then
They can
They're
go
able to
lower.
do that. Yeah, I mean, I think it incentivizes, I think it helps with
the
this for
incentives are
sure.
going in the right direction
Yes,
to
I would
lower
agree with
rates.
Yes.
Yes. I'm hoping that's what we're doing here. That seems what we're doing.
Where are we? Are we on line 20?
I did read through it, but yeah, this is for the non-net metering standard offer.
Okay.
Not more than 10 megawatts, located on the same or adjacent parcel, are not considered the same plant if they use separate generators, inverters, and production meters.
Maybe we have some PUC because, you alluded that he's just enlighten us on that.
I
For the
have,
record,
for the record favor, I have a series of concerns I could bring to the committee and just read them to you if you'd like at this point, or at your pleasure, Chair. What would you like me to?
about the whole,
About,
all
about
of the
the whole
language.
thing, yeah, about this whole definition. We do have some concerns. And I would be happy to share those concerns with the committee if you'd like.
I mean, yeah, of course, I'm just debating whether we pop you on the chair right now or
Right,
whether we
exactly.
give everybody a little. Pardon?
I think it makes sense.
Okay, here we go.
Attending to this. Right?
Do you want me to switch chair? Or
Sure.
do you want me to?
You want me, I'd like to say,
So, Madam Chair, I'm happy from Mr. Faber, but I also would like, I think we're gonna hear from the EMQC on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that what we're getting right now?
You're gonna get some preliminary concerns, and then I'm gonna suggest a course of action. So I can actually read from my phone.
All right, so we are now officially hearing from the PUC.
Yeah, yeah, we've discussed this, and these are.
Okay.
This is where we came down on this. Again, for the record, I'm Greg Faber.
And I'm sorry, Greg, or Mr. Faber. So this is Chair McNamara's seen the email I sent to
This
him.
is-
He's read the language.
This is his.
This is the official
This is-
response from the
yes.
PUC. Okay.
Well, it always is when I'm speaking.
I know, I wanted to make sure.
So we have discussed this, yeah.
Okay.
Unlike last week, where we.
Because I know he was
seen it.
traveling last week. That was all I wanted to
And-
check.
Yeah, he's traveling today as well, but
Okay,
we did have a chance to speak. So, okay, so the PUC, we're open to improving the definition of single family. However, we think it should be done through a stakeholder process. A process whereby you tell us to come back next session and say, present a revised definition. Okay, and here's why. Here's some of our concerns. So this current definition raises several process concerns for us. Again, we're reviewing all these things. We're charged with reviewing these things, as are other state agencies, right? All these solar plants. So right now, under this definition, someone could propose basically a 10 megawatt facility, divided into two 5 megawatt facilities, and file those simultaneously. So now we're looking at two separate projects on the same parcel simultaneously, not just us, but A&R is looking at two separate ones. All the municipality is looking at two separate ones. All the adjoining landowners, do they have to participate on two separate ones? Or can we look at things in a cumulative way? I mean, that's a question we're asking ourselves. I mean, we're looking at impacts of each separate one because that's the way we do it. But if you were to look at things cumulatively, that changes our review, and it changes the review of other agencies as well. It also impacts the participation of the municipality as well as adjoining landowners and any other parties. Because now they're participating in fronts. I mean, do they have to? Can they participate as one? It's a question, and it's a concern for us. We're not sure how to review these things when we see what looks to us on the land use basis as one large project. And it's filed as two separately under this definition. You can do that now under this definition. Right now, that would be one big project. If this definition goes in, it's two small ones. Small.
I just have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So would you do the stakeholder engagement in your rulemaking?
We would like to do it outside of a rulemaking because the rulemaking would take a very long time. We'd like to get back to you next session. So that would be quicker. But I'm sure Ellen could draft language. Sorry, Ellen. That would tell us to do something like that. You know, convene a stakeholder process to come up with a revised definition for you, and bring it back to you next session. And of course, we'd included all the parties. We'd include Rev, BPERG, all those folks as well, municipalities, A&R, DPS, everybody who looks at these things. You know, another problem for us is, and this gets to the cost of these projects and the cost savings. So there's a reason for having a 5 megawatt cap on tier 2 res projects, right? Because that counts as a reduction in the utilities load under 5. Over 5, that's an ISO asset. It doesn't count towards the utilities load reduction. The load reduction in turn lowers prices for ratepayers. So when you go to what looks like two 5s right together, ISO might look at that as 110. And that reduces the utility's profit, or that reduces the utility of that project to the utility. You can use those two words, but you get it. So it doesn't reduce their load. Therefore, it doesn't reduce their operating costs. And that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to keep costs low for ratepayers. But if it's considered as a 10, that means ISO controls that asset. It's no longer a reduction in the utility load. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's another concern we have. And I spoke about the municipalities already. You know, would a town have to intervene on two separate projects at the same time? It's very costly. Some towns have lawyers, some towns have counsel, most don't, in my experience. If they have to pay a lawyer to participate in two PUC hearings on two separate 5 megawatt projects at the same time, that's going to be costly. It's going to be costly for us, it's going to be costly for all the agencies involved. It's difficult for us to do. So these are all questions we have, concerns. And we feel they would be better worked out in a stakeholder process. We support utilizing scarce resources, having more things on the same parcel if it makes sense, but we need clear guidance on how to do that and how to review these projects. And this definition, it's better than the earlier one, but it really leaves a lot of questions unanswered in our estimation. So that's it. That's our take on the language so far.
Do you guys will you guys be submitting written testimony, or could you?
We certainly could. We can come in and deliver this again.
No, we like to have stuff. I like to have stuff up on the.
Right. Yeah, this is just something we did this morning. So
yeah,
it's an email form. I can certainly email it to
yeah, that'd be great.
Jack.
When I'm reviewing testimony, I like to have, it's so much easier to go back and look at a written document than it is.
I do have it written down.
I want you to.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Faber? I thought I saw some eyebrows moving.
I don't think you can see me peripherally.
I feel you. I can feel. Yes, I knew. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the potential for this stakeholder process, if it's going to happen, to be a little less narrow, because it could.
You could broaden it as much as you like.
Yeah, and get more of a sense of, what are some of the barriers and how do we optimize land use? And I mean,
obviously some work it's going to need some work to define the boundaries of that process and the timeline and all that. But you got Ellen, she does this stuff all.
And you would need or want legislative direction, I assume, on that.
I think that would be the way
process.
to go, to tell us to come back at a specific time and submit recommendations, something along those lines. We've done that many times in the past.
Because to me, I know this is complicated policy and there's a lot of complexities to consider, but I'm just very focused on the pictures we've seen of land where it seems very clear to me we should be maximizing solar.
Right.
And so I know it's complicated, but it seems like we should be able to find our way through this.
Oh, I think we can.
So that we're putting solar where where there's already all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what I care about.
Right.
You
could put that as a goal of our.
Put solar where we already have all the stuff and get back to us on December 15th.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe thoughts from the PUC on what we would need to ask you to consider. Rep. Sibilia?
Yeah. we can do that.
I'm just trying to refresh my memory on tier 2 obligations and if there's any something that inhibit any smart locating.
Sorry, I missed the first part of that.
I'm just trying to remind myself of that tier 2 obligations and the dates of those. And a year is not really gonna inhibit smart
I don't think so.
location. It sounds like what we should do. But, just pointing to make sure understanding like what other factors might be out there and pointing us towards getting this done sooner rather than later.
Right, we want to get it sooner than later. That's why we don't want to use a rulemaking.
Yeah.
To do it the fastest way possible. You folk will be gone for the summer, so once you get back, you'll see it.
Supposedly we'll be gone for the summer.
Most of the summer. Some part of the summer.
Fourth of July weekend, I think we get that.
Yeah, Rep. Southworth, did you have? a thought?
Oh, I think it's the better path than what the path we're on right now.
Rep. Corey?
I'm just curious if it could also be a vehicle for more streamlined permitting with the fact that you'd have all the agencies at the table. Just to think about our goals having doubled for tier 2. And knowing that, what some of the barriers that we actually have control over are, I think could be valuable. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah,
Just feels to me that the concern is having to defend against, well, having to participate in 2 5 meg processes. I don't know what it is, but it feels as though there's a way to prevent that, which fairly straightforward way to prevent developers from building one big project and calling it 2 projects.
There's certainly ways to do that. This definition doesn't do it,
Yeah.
but maybe we can come up with one.
yeah, and my hope would be that you would come up with one. That you wouldn't come back in December and say, oh, sorry, we can't.
So we put that.
No, we'll come up with something. Will everyone be happy with it? Partially. Yeah.
It's an optimistic answer.
Yeah, all right,
So, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I have been informed that the head of Vermont for Clean Environment or a Healthy Environment, Annette Smith, is available to testify on the single plant issue if you would like her to, as a public and interested organization.
yeah,
I
think she's submitted a pretty lengthy letter that the committee has in our inboxes, so. Yeah, we can all read that, and we will continue our single planet discussion next week, maybe or later this week. Yeah, John.
Well, no, Annette would like to testify before you finish. She's asked a number of times all session. I don't know why she's not been provided the same opportunity that many other witnesses have provided numerous opportunities. Is there a reason?
I'll get back to her. Thank you. All right, guys, why don't we take, I already got back to her, by the way, but I'll get back to her
You
again.
told her she's having testify?
I told her that she was welcome to submit public comment and that it would be forwarded to the whole
But not
committee and
testify.
posted on the website, right?
But not testify.
Correct.
Okay.
That is testimony.
That, in my mind,
No,
that's
person
testimony,
testify.
but, okay,
Like
well,
Peter
we-
has.
so if we continue our discussions of single plants, we will give that more thought. So, all right, guys, why don't we go up by, take a break.